Right. So, welcome everyone. Um, I'm excited to hear from Angus and Rosemary today, and we'll just hand it over. I think you probably need screen sharing abilities. Is that right? Either of you? You're still muted, Angus.
We don't actually, Matt. I did send you a
Oh,
PDF, which is just the bullet points, but we can do that. We can do that orally. It's no problem.
all right. Take it away.
Okay.
I would like to sort of just a couple of introductory remarks before we slow about the structure and things, and I think Rosemary would also like to before we actually get into the content. Um, the reason we're actually doing this this is because of a question that Matt asked in the group. I don't know, it's going back 3-4 weeks ago. He said, "Would you like to do a pop up on it?" Because I had mentioned it. It's like in the context of doing occult science, and it's it's yeah. It's a deeply interesting lecture, but it's also opened up, interestingly, because of your question, Matt, a way of studying Steiner that I hadn't really considered doing before, which was sort of like time based. And you'll see evidence of that when we get to my part of the presentation. But that's all I wanted to say before we start. Rosemary, did you want to make any introductory remarks, or would you just like to kick off?
I'll take it from there. Angus actually contacted me by email on May 30th. I think this was like a week after that lesson that he's referring to, where Angus described discovering this lecture in the library when he was at university, and that was his entree into anthroposophy. So I think it's evidence of the angels working that, I put it in the chat after he said that. Yes, it was also really important for me when I discovered that lecture. So the angels made Angus notice that I said that in the chat. And this is the first time Angus ever contacted me. So he contacted me and he asked me if I'd like to work with him on a pop-up. So that was about 6-7 weeks ago. And I think Angus and I have been really percolating with this. And this is, just an hour. So we're probably going to work on this further in some other way. But my my first comment has to do with the timing of this lecture. October 1919, he gave this to members of the Anthroposophical Society in Zurich. So it's like an inside training pep talk to the team. New information, new emphasis, new jobs to do, new perspectives to get. The two things that he tells them to pay attention to is the pictures that you get in your thinking. And at the very end of the lecture, he says, notice the miracles in your life. So these are two ways that the angels work that you can already look at without any further ado. And then developments in the next few years furthered that in the sense that the venues where you could work with angels increased notably. Waldorf's education was kicked off in Stuttgart in August of 1920. And at that inauguration, there was a ceremony where all the faculty and staff were together, and Steiner worked with the angels, the archangels, and the archi to dedicate the teachers, the college that was working together, and also the whole school. And it was a subsidiary of the Waldorf Astoria cigarette factory. So it was, a large entity that was being blessed. Then in 1924, June, the agriculture course was given, and that taught farmers how to work with the spiritual beings of nature in soil, weather, plants, trees. And at the Christmas conference, 1923-24, Steiner gave sacred mantra, the foundation stone meditation, which also invokes the angelic hierarchies. Everybody that joins the Anthroposophical Society receives a copy of this. They're not told you must do it in such a way, but it's there for people to access in their own freedom, in their own way. And then also in 1924, there were 19 lessons given to a select group who joined of their own accord. And in these mantras, 19 mantras, there are specific conversations with the angels in which the various angels tell you what part of your being is being worked on in this way and that way. So it's all very specific ways to work with the angels that completed the instructions that Rudolf Steiner was able to give to the, shall we say, the people who had taken up this task as a spiritual path. With that, let's say Angus and I are examples of people who have been on this path for a while. My story, I'll give you a few exhibits. Encyclopedia of Angels, first publication, 1997. I was a writer and researcher on this book. I was leading a pretty selfish life. I had been in a spiritual community years before, but it was like 15 years ago when I didn't have a spiritual practice at the time. A friend invited me to dinner. I met the woman who was putting together these occult encyclopedias as her business. She was really successful at it, Rosemary Ellen Guiley. And so for a whole year and a half, I was paid to do writing and research on angels all over the world. I wrote half the book. She gave me credit, in this edition anyway, on the acknowledgements page. One of the books she gave me to read was The Four Seasons and the Archangels. It's 5 lectures explaining how each of the seasons is overseen by one of these archangels. Uriel is the angel of summer. I was working on this in the mid-90s, and I got this poem, June 21st, 1997. Solstice moon at midnight, after lightning, thunder, rain, baptism in luminous mist. Occasional star seems closer. Moonbeam adds new colors, undulating around her forceful white. Thus, Uriel arrives with secret pomp. People must sleep, most creatures too. Who wakes into this ether? Seekers, poets, those with second sight, bathe in reflected fire, airy water light. And I should say, as an aside, that I've been receiving these kinds of poems all my life, and I had an attitude which I call tacit coaching. In other words, I accepted the presence of spiritual beings. I was brought up as a Catholic. Angels, saints, Jesus, Mary, they were like family. It was no problem for me to feel like spiritual beings were part of my life. But I didn't have a serious practice at this time, but the poems were indicators. I have this exhibit, The Angels, edited by Robert Sardello, came out in 1993, but it was a series of essays put together by the people who spoke at a conference at the University of Dallas in 1990 that was inspired by exactly this lecture by Steiner. Sardello was a student of James Hillman at the University of Dallas. Thomas Moore was also one of Hillman's students. You might be aware that at that time, angels were big business. That was why Rosemary Guiley wanted to do that Encyclopedia of Angels. It was, people were just eating this up, and the presence of angels was taken seriously, at least by this group of humanities teachers, full of all kinds of really juicy information, like the fact that Bob Dylan consistently, time after time, accredited his songs to spiritual inspiration. He said, they came through me. I wasn't the one who wrote these. So I lost my parents in 1998. I picked up Steiner's books again while I was in mourning. I started reading Steiner a lot on my own. I joined the society and I decided to attend Waldorf teacher training. I was in my late 50s at that time, and everybody else in the class, it was about two dozen people, were 30 and under. There were a few exceptions. So it was like a really hard thing for me to do, to be an elder person among all these youngsters. But I accepted the strain with a certain equanimity that I attribute also to spiritual beings. And the minute that we started reading How to Know Higher Worlds, I think the first chapter says, watch your thoughts and your emotions. If you have mean thoughts, it's like sending a bullet to another person. Being really alert to guarding your feelings and emotions. Well, I became a Waldorf teacher and I did practice all of the spiritual advice that Steiner gave for working with the children's angels and so on. It was the hardest job I ever had, but very satisfying. I also practiced biodynamic agriculture. And if you have access to some land where you can be a gardener, I advise it for lifetime therapy. You really do have wonderful new feelings and thoughts when you're working with plants and the forces of nature in your neighborhood. So I was gradually becoming a devotee. I didn't say the Foundation Stone meditation every day, but in 2007, September, was an unusual conversion of Ramadan, Yom Kippur, and the United Nations Day of Peace were all happening in the same week. And one morning I woke up and I had the inspiration to do an art project. I hadn't thought about this before. I attribute it completely to angelic inspiration. To go around town and attend all these talks and programs that were going on to celebrate these sacred events around peace days, and do a pastel drawing after I attended. And this became 19 pastel drawings. Here's one of them. Here I happen to have handy. This was a beautiful program that we had out in a city park. It was called The Tent of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar. It was celebrating Ramadan and Yom Kippur. We actually pitched a tent in the park and sat there and had a spiritual conversation. And I have a little essay that I wrote about that I'm going to put in my Substack when I figure out how to use Substack. So my life as an anthroposophist really picked up when Facebook started and there were online groups. And one morning I got a wake-up call to make friends on Facebook with Andrew Linnell. This was in 2017, I believe. So it was through that friendship that I started working with Andrew on the Mistech project. I was a co-host with him for a couple of years. And some of the indications in the lecture about the possibilities of misused moral technology is the focus of that group. And I don't think Matt and Ashton have mentioned yet here that they're going to be at the Mistech conference coming up in August. So that was indeed something special. I had an inspiration a couple of years ago to sign up for a course reading Whitehead's Process and Reality. I hadn't planned to do it. Something told me you really need to check out Whitehead at this time. So it was a long thing. It was like 4 or 5 months. Very dense if you've read the book. And it was through that I got to be connected with Matt, who gave one of the wrap-up talks for that study group. And last but not least, last year, I was invited to learn a mantra that was given to a special group of young people in 1922 and 1923 that you say 3 times a day. And that is really actively participating with the spiritual beings, humans, as well as angelic, 3 times a day. And I've only been doing that for a year now. So I feel like that's a movement from my tacit coaching back when I first got the assignment to write and research about angels in the early 90s to today when I feel like and I think that we'll be working together on this going forward. There are new ways that we are supposed to be waking up to and working with the angelic beings. I'm so glad that Angus is going to give us more details about what he found, which probably will give us some clues as to where that's going. But my third bullet point was new forms and culture of the 20th century, some of which I was dipping into, but one of the most important is relationality, which Ian McGilchrist says is the keynote of his work, discovering the sacred relationality, cosmic, human, the natural world. That whole theme is everywhere I'm looking. I think that's a good example of the successful work of the angels through the 20th century. I think the work of James Hillman, the Esalen Institute, Richard Tarnas, you're all, Matt and Ashton are students of Tarnas. Chad who was in our group last time, said archetypes are lures of the gods. Archetypes, probably another way that angels are working. Are archetypes actually angels or archangels? Well, we'll probably find out eventually if we continue working in this way. And now another, I think the last thing I'd like to say is that all these waves of positivity must be our counterbalance as we're starting to go through more and more shock waves globally and nationally. For those in the USA, there's, total upheaval going on right now. But I think these waves of positivity will be constantly keeping us strong and clear so that we can work well as we go forward. So I'll hand it over to you, Angus.
Thanks so much for that introduction, Rosemary. When you were saying that Angus's introduction was through that book, that was actually the book that made me run away from Steiner. but Destiny had me sort of like back on path 6 months later after that. Interesting, interesting. So there's going to be a somewhat darker theme to sort of the part that I'm going to talk about, which is directly related to the lecture, because the lecture is very confusing. We're presented with this idea that that angels, that's like this part isn't confusing. It's the confusing bit will come later. So we're presented by this very clear idea by Steiner that angels, they have, it's like a threefold definite mission for humanity. So like come down from the Trinity, and this is the job that they've got to do, and that job is to work images into the astral body of human beings, and those images are going to, one, they are about furthering the sense of brotherhood or fraternity, the recognition of it's like equality between all human beings. So that's one of the images. The second image, which he calls religious freedom, is this also very central idea to anthroposophy, the idea that these images are going to awaken us to the reality that every time we see a fellow human being, we're seeing a divine being. It's the divine being's like that invisible being behind us, but every time I meet and greet a human being, it's not just a meat bag I'm talking to. It's a divine being, and this is that's like the second job mission that the angels have got according to this lecture. And then the third one is this idea that actually it is through thinking that we can actually know about the existence of these human beings. And you could sort of like go off into like in a deep angle into so like the whole philosophy of freedom, the importance of philosophy, which is originally what pulled our group together with under Matt and Ashton's inspiration there. But this genuine recognition that thinking is a spiritual activity, and this is something that the angels are supposed to cultivate in our astral bodies. Now comes the confusing bit. So that sounds like the type of angels that Rosemary was talking about. It's like the ones that inspire the good in humanity. But then Steiner like presents this picture, and he says, but if humanity doesn't wake up to those pictures, the angels, they still have their job to do. And what they will do, rather than working in the astral body where we can be conscious, they will work in our etheric bodies where we are completely unconscious. But this will have radically different effects. And those effects are, if we think about the aspect of the brotherhood, fraternity, or it's like universe, total equality might be another way of saying it. He says these angels, through their work in the etheric body, they will provoke confusion with sexual forces. And I'll dig a little bit into this a little bit later, but reading around this, one of the things you'll find is that like nationalism and racism are often connected to these same forces. So even though he only talks about sexual forces in here, or reproductive forces, if you like, you can also, as a subtext, perhaps hear nationalism or racism as it's like one of those effects. The second one, instead of seeing everybody as a manifestation of the divine, this will lead to a deepening of the understanding of the medical effects, both bad and good, or good and bad, of nature's products. And this can also be used in a destructive fashion. So the emphasis here is on these angels become destructive rather than constructive in the when they work in the astral body. And then finally, we come to the if we don't wake up to the images of thinking being the means by which we can consciously become aware of the activity of angels in us, this will be converted into like a mechanical occultism. This is what Rosemary was talking about with Mystech and the Andrew Linnell project. So you've got this contradiction going on there. So how can these so-called they're traditionally good guys, the angels, and there's a very dark picture that Steiner is painting in this conference, and it's confused me. Well, the first time I read it, I didn't understand it, but when I read it again, was it 5, was it 10 years later? I don't know. Once I'd got deeper into Steiner, I still felt I don't understand it, and I'm not going to come with a complete solution to it today either. But I have been reading around the period that he was writing there, and that has, I believe, led to some deeper insights, and those are what I'd like to share with you here. So this was GA 182 in October 1918. If you go back to GA 179, which is 1917, one of the chief questions Steiner is trying to ask himself and within the society: what are the causes of the First World War? Why is this going on? Remember, it's like the World War One. Europe thinks it's the center of the world, so it causes a world war. World War One has been going on for 3 years now. So destruction on a scale that was completely unknown to humanity. And he starts in this series of lectures 179 looking at this question of how we regard history, because traditionally it's often presented as cause effect, and in this series of lectures, there's 6 of them, one of the things that he's really keen to emphasize is this notion has to be completely disregarded when you're looking at historical processes, that this is manifestation of divine impulses coming into humanity. So he's made a big effort to really highlight that part. And I won't be able to capture, 6 hours of lecturing in 2 minutes when I describe it to you. But if it sounds interesting, it was very interesting rereading it, and I can recommend it. So after that, he writes, or he doesn't write, he gives a series of lectures, which is in GA 180. So we're moving into the beginning of 1918 now. It's called Ancient Myths, but there's one bit he's still on this mission to understand what the causes of the First World War, and then he just says it's in it's lecture. If it's important, I can get back to you on it, but he talks about having to Europe was stagnating. It's stuck in its ways is the image he presents. And he says that the divine forces, we have to remember here, is we can't think of goody-goody. Divine force is good forces, but it's also evil forces. So divine forces, they worked to make Tsardom, or the Tsarist Russia, a hate object in Europe. He uses that term. Russia had to become a hate object so that the appropriate development could happen, and that's already, my God. It's this idea of creating tension to make something happen. That's not particularly strange, but this idea that these divine beings actually have to create hate so that humanity can move forward on its evolution. He's very careful in his normal way of saying it might sound a little bit extreme to express it like this, but those are his words there. So then we come to I'll jump over 181. Then we come to the whole lecture series in 182 prior to the lecture that we're talking about today. And one of the things he's really interested in there, still on this theme of World War One, is what are the dead up to, and how are they related to the processes of destruction that are happening in Europe? And I'm going to give two strong pictures that he gives from that lecture series that I think also might be able to help us digest this seeming contradiction we met in when I began the presentation. So one of the things he says is that people who were dying in the First World War, it's like one of the strong experiences of many souls is they had lived a completely materialistic life. They had never been exposed to spiritual ideas, and that they were going to be working to make sure that humanity wakes up to a more spiritual understanding of life, so that spirituality becomes a more discussed topic, shall we put it, throughout the world. He then goes on to describe how we used to, here in the world, we work with our hands. I was out in the garden earlier shifting logs. It's like putting stuff through a mulcher and that type of thing, working with physical things, you know. But what do the dead work with? That's interesting. That's really interesting, because he says basically their equivalent to our physical matter is the feeling life. It's the astral realm. And by extension, so like feelings create actions. So it's feeling stroke the will life that are being affected. So they are continually working into our feeling life to create these type of actions, or these historical results is the picture that he's presenting. And then the final note before I make a couple of personal observations about angels in general. The other thing that he does here and in many other places is he talks about that the societal problems that humanity has, and remember he's talking 100 years ago, he says they are only resolvable. They are only resolvable when we begin to have conscious interaction with the dead and with the angels, which I think somebody who's particularly interested in the social threefolding question there, I think there's a lot that can be fed into that conversation. Obviously, it's the more esoteric aspect of it, but it becomes, it's like rooted in another substance if we're to take Steiner's ideas seriously here. So, okay, that was the bit on the lecture. I would like to a couple of experiences. It was so nice listening to Rose talk about her own experiences. I've been reading anthroposophy for nearly 30 years now, and I meditated on and off for 27 of those years. There was no regular practice. And then, so like when the world was going through pandementia, I happened to be listening to an Italian anthroposophist, a guy called Tiziano Bellucci. He's fantastic, Lorenzo. I don't know if you know him. And he was just describing. He was describing how he works with the meditation pictures that Steiner gives, and he was actually he went into some detail about the triangles. But he was very specific at one point. He said, I did all of these exercises for him it was about 4 years. And then all of a sudden something started happening. So something was brought to life in him. And because of what was happening in the world, because of it's like having meditated many times in my life, but never made it like let's call it a religious practice, or like a true spiritual practice, I made the decision that, yep, That's what I'm going to do. Every morning and every evening, I'm going to meditate. And the fruits of that are really, it's so difficult to talk clearly about it, because they're subtle. They're subtle impressions, but they are very real impressions, and they become even more real if you're really grounded in, or at least for me, if you're really grounded in Stein, what the ideas that Stein's presenting in the philosophy of freedom. But one of the chief experiences that has grown really strong over the last year or so, not to the degree that you can use it consciously as a tool, but it becomes a very interesting source of inspiration when in meditation. But this can also be out when walking in the forest. There's a twofold experience going on for me. One of those experiences is something coming together. It's like a previous duality. It could be in any field over the time, interested in looking at, or bits of literature that I've picked from over there and picked from over there, and I've never thought about there being a common connection. And then suddenly I am given. I am given. I don't make it up. I don't create it. I am given that link, and that sensation of wholeness, that experience, that direct experience of wholeness that comes with that waking up is very real, and it becomes an increasingly common experience. It's still not common, but it's happened enough times to say that for me to be able to say it is a direct consequence of the particular path that I have chosen. And the other aspect of this, it's like a divine source of inspiration, exactly like Rosemary was talking about, is it can also be outside of meditation as well. This is an experience. I don't want to go into too many details about my forest walk, but there are, how can I put this? I'm living in my thinking whilst I'm walking around the forest, and then suddenly I'm for a 10-15 second period, I'm pulled outside of myself. I don't see myself from outside myself, but I am so absorbed in the content that is being given to me. Again, it's this a more complete understanding on a certain issue, that when I actually return to normal day consciousness, it's wow, how could, and this might be an experience other people can relate to, how could I have ever forgotten what is so obvious now? Because I'm particularly nerdy with Italian just now, and I'm reading with a good friend, I'm reading Dante's The Divine Comedy, which is an amazing, and the Paradise part especially is it's just amazing. Been very fortunate to meet an Italian teacher who loves that type of literature as well. And so there's Dante uses this term, pane degli angeli, the bread of angels, and that is what I experience directly. It's on occasion through my own spiritual practice. So that's what I had to offer. Hopefully there's between the two of us, we've managed to stimulate a couple of questions. We'll see.
Yeah, thank you both so much. Very rich. I love the way you wove together personal stories and your attempt to uncover the meaning of Steiner's lectures, both during and then just after the war. on the work of these angels. Just brings together the esoteric, the historical, and the biographical. What's everyone thinking and feeling?
I don't know that I have a question per se. Maybe this will turn into a question. But yeah, something really hits home for me out of this lecture. Um, and Angus, you touched on it when you gave the bit of the summary of the key points. But yeah, we have this threefold work of the angels, and then kind of the threefold, where it can go off path, basically off course. And one of those three off course is in the medical realm. Certainly pushes on my interests, right? And um, and I don't have the quotes all in front of me, but he's talking about, this coming corruption of how we're going to understand and use medicine and all these things. This was 1918, so he's talking like 10 years just before penicillin was discovered. Of course, that's you can call that the great miracle, the first miracle drug of our modern medical era. Of course, we can go way beyond that and describing our whole modern history. It wasn't the beginning of corrupted principles of medicine. That's been going on for all of human history. But yeah, this age, penicillin and beyond, and what Steiner seems to be looking forward to, alluding to, is as I say, has a great meaning for me as far as when you have this kind of corrupted knowledge and corrupted principles of medicine. I know very well through Hahnemann and the principles of cure versus suppression, and that's a very practical set of principles and knowledge. But yes, Steiner here is giving us, as he always does, this much bigger spiritual context of what are the actual results of that. And he says it in so many words. People will think they're doing good, and medicine causes good results for people, and everyone's happy, and all these things like that. But no, there's a very profound dark path that is opened up when we start to follow that. So, anyways, as for obvious reasons, my ear was quite keen to hear when he was talking about that.
Well, the mysteries of evil, actually, evil is the big mystery for the fifth post-Atlantean epoch. Life and death and birth was the mystery of the fourth, and evil is the fifth, and the logos is going to be the sixth. So grappling with these dark turnings is definitely, one of the scholarly artistic conundrums of our age. And just looking at the artists of the 20th century, like Joseph Beuys is a wonderful example. He's a veteran of the Luftwaffe who almost died, went through the rest of his life with a plate in his head and doing this tremendous social sculpture training to people. But it was all, the evil was right sitting there, palpably present, and he was trying to mediate it with the spiritual symbols that were alive to him. So I would say that yes, welcome to the 21st century. Welcome to the fifth post-Atlantean epoch. This is our work. We have to flex our spiritual muscles to be able to meet these new challenges. And the angelic realms, however you approach it, and I must emphasize, as Steiner did, you must do it in complete freedom, and you must take up your spiritual practice with love, not because somebody's telling you or because it's urgent or scary. Letting it sit with you and develop over time. This was like 30 years that I'm talking about. And the angels don't push us. They know that we can only take so much. They'll help us to get what we need to handle the situation at hand, and form the alliances and associations that we need to be working in too. And I guess this is a good example of it.
Renzo, please.
Yeah, I have a question for everybody, or let's say I want to draw a connection between what was being said about the work of the angels and the bread of the angels, how they manifest their positive influence when we think, and what we read in the last chapters of the occult science regarding inspiration. Are we to think that this bread of the angels and inspiration are the same thing? Is there a difference? I kind of think we are talking about the same thing, but maybe you have different insights. And second, regarding the negative influence of the angels on the etheric body, it made me think about psychoanalysis, Freud, and his reading of war as mass neurosis, and of course, neurosis always has a sexual origin in Freud, and even more to Wilhelm Reich, and about the concept of the help me here, Jeff, the armor. Do you call it armor in English? Yeah. The armor, I think, for Wilhelm Reich is this rigidity that comes from sexual neurosis, but that manifests as an actual physical rigidity in the body that can be visualized, localized in specific regions. So that's something really etheric. I always think that Reich's work becomes very interesting when we deal with the etheric, and I think it's interesting that here is that when the angels do not work properly, they do not influence us through the astral, but through the etheric, and this links very well with what we know from psychoanalysis and Reich in particular. So that's it. Thank you.
I'll just try to give my version of an answer to your direct question there, Lorenzo, and you might like to weigh in as well, Rosemary. I think it's a good question, an important question to ask. What is it in imagination, inspiration, or intuition? Whilst it's an interesting question, for me at the moment, it's the fact that it's a real experience that is so important, that I notice it having a tangible effect. It's like on my life. It's like very direct impact. But I mean, I can also recognize that sometimes, personally, it's less images that I get. It's actually a connection of it can be through words, which would make it inspiration, but sometimes it's actually it's wordless, if I can put it like that. So is it intuitive? I don't know, and I don't want to put labels on it. I'm thinking a little bit about Bruce and his valuable contributions in our occult science group here, that I don't need to give it labels. I need to explore these experiences myself, and I think those type of questions will become clearer as the spiritual practice deepens, and the reality of the experience becomes clearer and clearer, because it's still early days, if I can put it like that. Rosemary, would you like to chime in there?
Lucid partnership, or I forget exactly what Garfield called it. Final participation, when you really know that you're in sync with the proper spiritual forces, that gives us courage, strength, and lucidity to do the right thing. So living into getting those skills is the path, and it's all over the place. People are not altogether doing it the same way, the right way at all. And there will be a time when we'll understand why these evils happened. That's my faith, is that I'm in a cloud of unknowing because I'm not ready yet, but I will be ready, and we'll share the lucidity that is needed for the moment. Crisis by crisis.
Karsten, please.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to share how when I read this text and read about these kind of 3 gifts from the angels that Angus was talking about, I think kind of aligned with some very specific experiences that I've had in my life. So in one of our earlier meetings, I shared the fact that when I was 25, I was an absurdist of belief. I believed there was only physical existence, and that life was basically absurd, had no meaning, and could not have any kind of meaning. And then I had this sudden awakening into the fact that there's a divine dimension to each living being, and I experienced that within that I was an immortal or infinite being, and that was not only true for me but for everyone else. So it was like a new sense that was awakened in me, and it happened spontaneously. I mean, I wasn't looking for it. I didn't do any kind of spiritual practice. The only kind of spiritual practice I did was that I was a heavy thinker, and I was really pursuing truth. And I thought this absolutist view I had was the truth. I just, to my own surprise, learned that this was not the case. But it was interesting that it was a kind of gift that was given to me, and that kind of set me onto this spiritual path and investigation of the kind of spiritual dimension of our being and our immortality and so on. So I kind of align that with this point where Steiner's talking about actually an interest in other beings was in a sense awakened in me. I was kind of lifted out of my kind of confined, self-satisfied self that had no real interest in other beings, and suddenly my scope was expanded immensely. So that was one thing. And then, so this happened when I was 25. And then when I was 35, at this point, I had studied different spiritual teachings, and I was a member of an esoteric branch of Freemasonry. And I started to feel in this group how my spiritual freedom, due to the kind of culture that was in this group, so it was inspired by theosophy, but I felt that my freedom was kind of curbed, to use Steiner's phrase, that it was limited in this group. And I had this dream where I in the dream, I was being chased through the streets, and I was kind of being exposed to some kind of religious persecution. So I was being persecuted because of ideas in the dream. And then in a dream, there was this dove, white dove, that came into my field of vision, and it kind of flew into my head. and then I had just this kind of explosion that once again took me into this realm of absolute bliss and a sensation of everything being well, but also me being free and liberated from these persecuting forces that I was surrounded with. And it kind of, it followed me for a while, because I mean, I've had contact with different groups, and always after a certain time when I've been in a group, I feel this kind of limitation of my freedom due to the culture. Even if there's no formal membership or anything, it's so easy to become ingrained in these kind of thought structures, ideologies that are somehow limiting your freedom. And I've always managed, and very often when I sense this kind of limitation of my freedom, I go back to this dream I had and this kind of experience that was given to me that kind of lifted me out of the limitation of religious persecution of one kind or another. And so also I've had a third experience. I don't want to share that because I don't really know what it's about yet, but I know that one thing that is very much on my mind is to have this. I talked about it in our last meeting, to have this very vivid experience that we're actually living in a spiritual world. Even that which we think of as physical is actually spiritual. So this is very, and I mean, I think that was the third thing that Steiner was talking about, that would somehow be granted us as an experience. I'm not there, but I'm working on that. I can feel that very strongly, and it's actually connected to an experience I had, which I don't want to share because I really don't. I still don't understand what it was that happened to me in that experience. But right now I somehow connected with this desire to experience the world as spiritual, as fundamentally spiritual. Yeah, just one more thing. Also, talking about the dark side. One thing I felt very strongly in recent years is, and I think it has to do with the fact that I tend to feel that everything is well. There's no danger, and when I read this text by Steiner, I also sense a certain kind of alarmism in it that doesn't really get to me. I don't take it to heart, but I will say that sometimes I can feel a kind of complacency in terms of spiritual practice, a kind of being a little too laid back, and too much. I mean, being also subject to pleasure seeking and things like that. That I can feel actually counter my progress in terms of experience the world more fully and more spiritually. So I feel these dark forces. I think it's true that they are there, although, and I feel them in me as well. I just want to share that.
Thank you, Karsten. Ashton, did you have something?
Nah, I think it's a little off topic now, and we're near the end. But I did just want to welcome Lisa and Leilani. Lisa, did you want to say something? Go ahead.
Well, I wanted you to finish, Ashton, if you.
Oh, I had nothing more to say. Just wanted to
Thanks.
say welcome because I hadn't seen you all before, but maybe you've been here. I don't know.
Little bit. Thank you so much. Thank you, Angus and Rosemary. Rosemary, could you, if you would, say a little bit more, say as a teacher leader in the classroom, about the experience of the being in relationship, working with the children through their angels, or more about that, if you could.
Well, I had a whole year of teacher training, and so a lot of master teachers shared the way that they worked with them. But yes, you do directly speak with the angel of the child, take it into your sleep as a prayer, as a request. Be conscious of it when you meet the child in the morning. Sometimes you do get a new fresh idea that you can work with right away, but sometimes it's just your attitude. And I believe it was Steiner who said it doesn't really matter what you do as a Waldorf teacher, it's who you are. And the same thing could hold true for all of us. It doesn't really matter what the content is. There's so much going on just being together. We percolate and we generate something new in the relationality, which is so many layered.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. I raised it with the frame of wanting to communicate to children that they are safe and protected and loved everywhere they go in the world. It's a challenging time to be able to communicate that, but I think it's pretty essential for to keep their experience of childhood being children now. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. I know we're at time here, but I can't help but share just how palpable the Luciferic and Ahrimanic temptations feel in our current time, where there's a certain form of spirituality that pulls people away from social concerns. They become very much obsessed with their own spiritual progress or whatever. Or emphasize that, oh, if everyone would just realize the truth of non-duality, all these problems would go away. And it's very escapist. And it reminds me of something Steiner says during the threefolding campaign in Stuttgart, where he was meeting with some theosophists who tended to be upper middle class, right? And he says something like, while you're at home meditating on brotherly love and what have you, your homes are being heated by coal that was mined by children in England. So get involved, right? And then the harmonic temptation, of course, is evident in those who think that there's a technocratic fix to all of this. We don't actually need to transform our hearts. We just need to find the right way of organizing society or the right carbon sink technology to get the atmosphere back into good working or whatever it might be. And that walking that middle path is very difficult. And Steiner's admonition that we really need to start communicating with the dead is like, I think both for that more luciferic form of spirituality that's just about myself and my own spiritual development, and that harmonic materialism, like communicating with the dead, is like, what are you talking about? But it's a moral. It's really it feels like a moral question to me that how can we really recognize the spiritual freedom and the divine nature of other human beings who are alive with us right now, unless we can also recognize that the dead are still with us too. They're also spiritual beings, and they have a stake in what's happening. And so, as enigmatic as this lecture is, it seems like it's a bucket of cold water, also trying to shock us awake to what's really at stake here. Because 100 years later, I think the problems that Steiner felt were so urgent then have only been magnified. So it's a very timely lecture to choose to speak to us about. So thank you both, Angus and Rosemary. And yeah, we don't have another event on the schedule, but as I mentioned on Tuesday, if you want to do a pop-up on any topic related to anthroposophy, spirituality, esotericism, doesn't need to be anthroposophic or Steiner related. It could be some other teacher or figure that you're interested in.
Or even, just opening, leading with the question and having like a dialogue,
Yeah.
more time for dialogue, that'd be cool. something a little more open-ended. Because it's nice to hear people sharing about their own experiences. And we have talked about having, some kind of session where we talk more about practice and things like that. That'd be neat. So,
Yeah.
Could I just on the question of practice there, Ashton, I mentioned lecture series 179 when he says the I is a will being, and we know that from esoteric science. But when you actually start doing the practice religiously, regularly, ritually, this is an activation of the will. So any type of spiritual practice where it's your will that is at the heart of the practice. That is, he makes just in this simple sentence. It's like the true I is essentially a will being, and that is what we are trying to develop. And we do that. We can do that in lots of different ways, which is why so many his suggestions on the different practices are so varied. So, thanks.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Wonderful session.
Thank
And
you.
we'll see you next time in whatever form that takes.
Thanks.